Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the meaning and calculation of unemployment. And I imagine that what this picture at the top is supposed to be is people in an application line, at least. And this guy's like, "Why are you taking my picture while I'm waiting for a job?" And this guy's like, "How long is this line?" And this guy's like, "Man, I got somewhere to be." And this guy's like, "Man, job seeking." So this is an interesting module. I actually encourage you just to read it. Oh yeah, she's like, "Yeah, I'm marginally attached." It's like a bad relationship. And then we kind of come down and talks about, actually, this is an interesting, bit here. The unemployment rates of different groups. We find that, as I mentioned in the lecture, race and gender and things, they have some interesting differences, we might say, right? Structural differences by race. So what is that? Structural racism. Yeah. So we can kind of take a look here and go down module 12. There we go. So we've got extra practice 12. Check your understanding, number 1, and I think there's only one. No, there's actually 2 or 3 in this one. Suppose that employment websites enable job seekers to find suitable jobs more quickly. What effect will this have on the unemployment rate over time? And it would decrease the unemployment rate over time. Because it connects job seekers with jobs faster, right? So it would bring down that rate of frictional unemployment. Also, suppose that these websites encourage job seekers who had given up on their searches to begin looking again. What effect will this have on the unemployment rate? Well, that would increase the unemployment rate. Because, and this is counterintuitive, but the more people who are searching for jobs, the higher the unemployment rate, right? If you have a lot of people who are just like, screw it, I'm not going to find a job anyways, they're not counted in the unemployment rate. And right now, in the middle of the global pandemic, we see that all the time. Huge numbers of people have been laid off from their jobs, but if they're not actively seeking work, they're not counted as unemployed. And so this question is actually saying, what would happen if we encouraged people who wanted jobs but hadn't been looking for them to start looking? It would bring the unemployment rate back up. So that there's some weirdness, right? There's some quirks in the unemployment rate that are very interesting as we kind of look at real data. Number 2, in which of the following cases would the worker be counted as unemployed? Explain. Rosa, an older worker, has been laid off and gave up looking for work months ago. She is not in the labor force, and we'd explain because she's not looking, not actively seeking, right? You've got to actively be seeking employment. There's actually some definitions of what that means in the surveys and things like that. B, Anthony, a school teacher, is not working during his 3-month summer break. Technically, Anthony is actually still employed because he's just not at work, just not at work that week, that time. So like if you're on vacation, if you're on a break, there's a whole host of like why you might not be at work that week. If you're sick, but you're still employed, you're still employed, right? So there are some teacher contracts that actually expire, and they don't expire, they don't back up like a June 1st to June 1st every year. There's some teachers that because of how their contract works, their contract expires on June 1st and then it doesn't start again until August 1st. And so for those 2 months, they are actually not employed. That's not usually how most of them work. So we'll just say that he's still employed. C, Grace, an investment banker, has been laid off and is currently searching. She is unemployed. Unemployed. And it says explain, right? But that could just be she's seeking and not working, right? So we'd say she's seeking a job and she's not working. D is Sergio, a classically trained musician, good for him, can only find work playing for local parties. Well, he's still employed. He's underemployed, right? We'd call him underemployed. And sometimes we say underemployed people are Peters. Some are Peters, the part-time for economic reasons folks. But some are not, right? I gave the example in the lecture of my father who took a full-time job at Target, even though he was a banker. And so we call underemployed somebody who has really high skills, but they have to take something that's below their skill level in terms of where they're at. So Sergio is underemployed. And then there's an E on the next page. Natasha, a graduate student, went back to school because jobs are scarce. She is not in the labor force and she's not seeking and not working. And we could say that maybe she's she might be a discouraged worker if she's looked in the last year and she would still like a job, but that doesn't tell us that. So we just have to say she's not in the labor force. 3, which of the following are consistent with the observed relationship between growth in GDP, real GDP, and changes in the unemployment rate, which are not? So this one requires that we remember that if, we'll say this, if GDP goes up, then usually, right, the usual is unemployment goes down, and vice versa. If GDP goes down, then usually we'd say unemployment goes up. So now we're going to read these and see which ones fit that. So part A rise in the unemployment rate accompanies a fall in GDP. That's rise in unemployment, fall in GDP. Yes, I guess that one aligns. An exceptionally strong business recovery, so that's GDP goes up, is a greater percentage of the labor force being employed. Yes, because unemployment going down means more people working, so that one's yes. So you can see that there's different ways they can ask these, and they're kind of wonky. Negative real GDP growth, so that's GDP goes down, is associated with a fall in the unemployment rate. That's not normal, so that's not normal. We wouldn't expect that to be true, unless there were maybe a large number of people who were dropping out of the labor force. That could happen. We've seen that during the pandemic, in fact, where the unemployment rate has gone from like 14% down to like 9%, and in large part because people dropped out of the labor force. It's not because a lot of more people got jobs, it's because they stopped looking. And that's catastrophically bad, right? The long-term effects of being long-term unemployed are really, really bad. So we don't want to see that happen. Let's take a look at these multiple choice questions. To be considered unemployed, okay. To be considered unemployed, a person must be not working, that's true. Be actively seeking, that's true. Be available for work, that's true. So it's all 3 E. And then it says 2, 3, and 4 go with this little table of information. What's the labor force participation rate? So the labor force participation rate is equal to the labor force out of the population. So we've got this table and we've got 100,000 over 200,000, so it's 50%. So that's B. 3, how many people are unemployed? And so that, right, the unemployed is just how many people are in the labor force who aren't employed. And so we are given that, we have UE plus employed equal, well, we're not given that. We're supposed to know that. Employed plus the unemployed equals the labor force. And we know that the total labor force is 100,000. And we know that the number of people working, either part or full-time, is 90. So this has to be 10,000. 10,000. And which is that? That is A. Number 4 says, what's the unemployment rate? Well, we know that the number of unemployed was 10,000 out of the labor force of 100,000 is 10%. So that's D. And number 5, so this one is not from that table. The unemployment problem in an economy may be understated by the unemployment rate due to people lying about seeking a job. That's not normal, no. B, discouraged workers. That can, yes, because discouraged workers, right, they aren't counted in the unemployment rate because they're not actively seeking. So we're gonna hold B because I think it's B, but I haven't read all of these. Job candidates with one offer but waiting for more. Well, those people are still unemployed, so I don't know that C wouldn't work. Overemployed workers, that's not really a thing. And E is not, no, so it's B. Discouraged workers are not in the labor force. They gave up looking, and that's why we call them discouraged. What is the labor market classification for each of the following individuals? This is free response number 2. Explain, be as specific as possible for each of these people. Julie has a graduate degree in mechanical engineering. She works full-time mowing lawns. So she is employed. And specifically, she's underemployed. And I didn't really talk about that in the lecture, but you could also maybe call her a Peter. It depends if maybe this is a full-time. Well, no, it says she's full-time. Never mind. So she's definitely not a Peter. She's just what we'd call underemployed. Her skill level is different from what she's doing. Part B, Jeff was laid off from his previous job. Bummer. He would very much like to work at any job, but after looking for work for a year, he stopped looking. So he's not in the labor force, and we'd say he is a discouraged worker because he quit looking. due to poor job prospects. Poor job prospects. In other words, he couldn't find one, so he's like, this is dumb. Why am I wasting my time? And he quit looking. C, Ian is working 25 hours a week at a bookstore, has no desire to work full time. He's just employed. And he's not a Peter because he doesn't want to work full time, so he's just employed. D, Raj has decided to take a year off from work to stay home with his daughter. Raj is just not in the labor force. And then we could say just generically, not in the labor force. He's not discouraged because he doesn't want a job. So Raj is just not in the labor force. All right, hopefully this helped you. See you next time.